Good morning, beautiful people of the internet, and welcome back once more to our Sunday special live. Today we are joined by Helen, Chorley, Piotr, Rusinek, and we have Adam Lawrence back. So, because it's been about 4 weeks, there was this brief interlude where he joined us at 3:30 in the morning. I think what we should do is myself, Helen, and Piotr would just stick ourselves on mute and play Candy Crush while Adam takes charge of the next hour. And I'm hoping he's going to explain the maths about how the government can abracadabra 400 billion out of thin air. I'm looking forward to that bit. That's maths I'd like to understand. I'm kind of hoping that I can explain that maths to my bank manager and they'll do the same thing. So, Adam, what have we missed?
Looking forward to the submission of the next Hammered Company accounts on that basis, Jay. Absolutely.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Can I explain that bit? So for those who haven't read it yet or haven't seen it was a funny thing because it was about third or fourth down the list of headlines on the radio when I was listening to it. And it was one of those very classic sort of moments where they just sort of nonchalantly say, oh, they've revised it from 0.6%. I think was it 1.2% down to 0.6% up or something. Some gigantic revision of nearly 2% of the GDP of the UK in 2021. Now, we're all sitting here probably thinking 2021, who cares to an extent because it's nearly 2024 now. But when they do the final national accounting figures, they do take an awful lot of time to ensure all these things are correct. Businesses have to report, accounts have to report, HMRC have to report, of course, the government has to report. And then they've got to check that it all makes sense. And this whole thing sort of centres around the data statistics geeks out there will have seen this use of what they call supply and use tables, where if you read the text from the ONS, you can see them brimming with excitement as they discuss this fantastically accurate method of measuring things that is better than all previous methods of measuring things. And they kind of they've gone back to 1997 and used this methodology because they've got the data, and it doesn't change things dramatically. And it's just sort of, there's the odd bit here and there, but again, it matters even less when we're going that far back in history, realistically, because what's happened has happened, and it didn't really change too much in 2020 on the main GDP figure, but had this huge impact in 2021, which has led to this gigantic revision. So there's all sorts of. I did comment in the supplement today, if you were Rishi, you might be tempted to say, well, actually, we did a better job than you all thought during the pandemic. But then you might not, that's economically, you might not want to rake over the coals of the old Partygate and all the other things that we know about. I'm not sure we can go back and say Matt Hancock covered himself in glory, for example. More likely covered.
He maybe covered somebody in glory.
I realised the folly of that when I said it. But it's just so much better coming from your mouth than mine, if you'll pardon the repeated error that I've made there. Not deliberately. Obviously, I'm still in holiday mode. I've got to stop. When in a hole, stop digging. Yeah, I get it. Right. Okay. So maybe he doesn't want to rake over those coals, but the opposition have had a lot of political capital out of the fact that. We've done a rubbish job. We're the lowest growing in the G7, yawn. It's like, well, actually, we probably weren't on these figures. In fact, we definitely wouldn't be. Having said that, these supply and use tables are available to other developed nations, and they might well be recalculating their own figures, especially if they look better. The US are already doing it, and I haven't looked at what revisions it's meant for the US historical data yet, I must confess. As I say, I've limited interest because what happened in the past is what's happened in the past to an extent. But to me, it did feel like it fit in a lot more with the actual economic narrative that I've kind of viewed over the last few years and comments that I've made and the real difference. And of course, we're talking about the Blue Book for 2021. So we're going back before the cost of living squeeze really started to bite. So the moral of the story would probably be, we actually started from a better place before Russia went into Ukraine and inflation really, really took hold at a certain 5-6% plus sort of level. Because I was looking back at some of my commentary from January 22, and whilst I was above other people's forecasts in terms of inflation, we were still talking about sort of 7% plus. But when Russia set foot into Ukraine, of course, that did change the parameters of the oil price and a whole cascade of other events that it caused, which sent us more towards the 11+% territory because of the energy side of that. Although the energy price rumblings, the energy markets were already moving significantly in sort of Q2 2021. So it's not just Russia going into Ukraine, and people have sort of called that a bit of not a false flag, because it was a problem on top of a problem, if you like. But it wasn't the be all and end all of the whole inflation situation, obviously. So that was the ONS, and that was their excitement for the week or year, and it deserved more than the very brief sprinkling it got in the business news and the press releases that it put out, I think. But probably the real conclusion will be reserved judgment until we really see what happened. We've still been on very restricted duty in terms of data and what's been provided. They're down to the bare bones for the month of August in general. But there was a bit of positive news around car production. Car production was up really significantly compared to where consensus forecasts were. All the other news has been bearish, including, we ended the week on the nationwide revealing 5.3% down for the year on their figures, 0.8% down for August, which was well under all the consensus forecasts. Is it just August being August as it used to be before the pandemic? We'll have to find out. I mean, I'm inclined to believe it probably is. And I've already commented this month about, a wobbly August and not drawing too much conclusion from, for example, unemployment was 3.8, then it was 4, then it was 4.2, and vacancies are down and all that. But how much recruitment goes on in the month of August anyway in a normal year, if anything is normal anymore? That's the problem. And we've lost the thread of that because we've lost the seasonality in the data over the last few years, and we've got new habits to deal with. So I'm sure the travel industry is dealing with many, 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 many more last minute bookings than they ever were. And if you look at this year, I think that's probably likely to continue, because I can certainly say for myself, for example, I wouldn't necessarily, if I was really, really well organised, I'd probably be looking at years where El Nino is more likely to be effective than others. But I'd be unlikely to be booking a Mediterranean vacation in the months of sort of July and August with 7 or 8 months in advance now. I'd be much more likely to book the time and then book it 2 weeks before, when I say that we're not going to have 43-degree temperatures or whatever. And I mean,
I think that would cost you a lot of money these days, like booking 2 weeks in advance.
I don't think it would, Piotr, because I was speaking to someone the other day who went to Florida on a whim in July, in June, because they got kids of an A-level age who had finished their exams, and they finished quite early. They finished sort of mid-June. They flew to Florida for £300 a person.
Oh, wow.
So that's outrageous. So if you know what to do, as in Jack's Flight Club or other services are available, obviously. But I think it would do if you went and had you. But I looked at how many people have been in. There's a travel agency near our office, and I walk past it on a sort of semi-regular basis, and it kind of makes me smile, because I've been booking my own holidays online for 20 plus years, right? Been using cashback sites, reward sites, hotels.com, blah, 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 all the rest of that, right? There's loads of books out there to tell you how to do it if you don't already know how to. In the old days, it was magnificent, because the cashback site, I was getting over 10% cashback on a lot of these things. And it was amazing what you could get. Then you had your credit card and your reward points and your this and your that and your the other and your 0% balance transfers. And it was really, really spectacular. That's been chipped back as the hotel industry has sort of railed back against the affiliates and all the rest of it, as is the nature of the beast. But it makes me smile, the thought that people will still go into a bricks and mortar travel agency 20 years after the internet sort of changed the way that I ever did it. But of course, travel agents still have good deals in the window. And looking at some of the deals that have been in the window, and looking at the price of some things these days, where we had a quote for a door replacement and a bit of other work at a property the other day, right? And basically, they wanted 110 quid for the egg box door. And I said I'm happy to say I'm sort of one line removed from having to order the doors these days. So I spoke to the guy in the office who orders the doors and said, look, mate, the last time I remember this, it was 15 quid. What is it these days? And he said, look, they're about 45 quid, including the VAT now, to get from Wix or wherever. I said, blimey, right, okay. So that's something that's trebled from, 7 or 8 years ago, whenever I used to order the doors myself or whatever. And but these guys wanted 400 quid labour a day, 2-man job, right? So it's basically going to be £1,000 to do this door and a bit of joinery work at this property. And I said to him, listen, we're going ourselves. It's as simple as that. Get the tools out. I mean, he's good at that stuff. I'm absolutely awful, but for £1,000, that's not happening. Now, of course, that quote's not being accepted, and it's pinned up as an example of how not to quote for a job in the office for sure. But nonetheless, some things in the travel agent's window look so cheap compared to pricing like that. And if everybody does start doing last minute, or not everybody, because people will be too anxious to do it, but if there is a shift in consumer patterns to do that, the industry has to respond. And if people have got excess capacity, I mean, the same person who flew to Florida for 300 quid gave me a great tip. Where I know we're going off beast and it's only 11 minutes in, but this is really worthwhile, I think.
Travel stories are important.
Well, there's a website called First Table, right, which is based around you getting the first table on a particular evening. And the stuff on there, I think you pay £5 to book, but it doesn't matter if there's 2 of you or 6 of you or whatever, 50% off the food, right? Now, things like Taste Card do this stuff, but the restaurants that are on this First Table are really, really worthwhile. So for anybody who has ever been into Birmingham city centre and dined at Asher's, brilliant Indian restaurant, really, really well thought of, award-winning. Asher's is on there, right? You don't often get a chance to go into Asher's and have 50% off. You could say you need 50% off to make it affordable because it's quite pricey, but no, at 50% off, it's very, very reasonable indeed. And she was using it because she had a theatre booking, and when you go to the theatre at 7 or 7:30 or whatever, you need an early table if you're going to do dinner beforehand. So it's absolutely ideal. But it also does last table. So what it's doing is that sort of Groupon idea of there's excess capacity early on in service and late on in service. And if you can get people in, you're hoping they spend on booze and stuff like that. But of course, what it's also done, which is clever, I think, is it's addressed the fact that if you're a restaurateur, just like if you're a hotelier, you're getting hacked off with all these online affiliate sites that are pushing traffic your way because they're taking all the sugar out of the tea, a bit like Deliveroo or Just Eat do for the takeaway people, right? Uber are doing much better, or Uber Eats are doing much better than the takeaway itself. But Uber Eats don't have to care because they haven't got to run the takeaway business and the logistics side of all of that. Whereas First Table is charging the consumer, but you're delighted to pay £5 for the rights of having, maybe 100 quid off your food bill in a really, really good restaurant. I mean, it makes tons of sense. So that's one worth looking up for people watching. But anyway, I'll digress back to the macro and the other bits that we haven't covered yet on the at the high level in the supplement. I don't think it was anything to do with this restatement of GDP. I'd be surprised if it was, but we had a bit of a decay in the swap rates this week, which is always welcome to see. It was very non-volatile. I don't know if unvolatile is a word really, but maybe it is a word. And looking at the US stock market at the moment, the volatility indicator, or the VIX, as they call it, the fear factor, is about as low as it's been for about 3 years, right? Or a little bit more than 3 years. So for whatever reason, volatility has been leaving the bond and stock markets in general, which is a good sign. I'm not sure if it's a justified sign, because if we go back to the Michael Burry chat from a couple of weeks ago, he certainly doesn't think it is justified, I don't think, but that's where the sort of panic indicators or not are at in the markets. I mean, I'm more inclined to sort of agree with him that there might be a bit of a bath taken, and also we maybe didn't cover when we talked about that the nuances of there's about 7 companies that are doing phenomenally well. Like Nvidia's passed its $1 trillion market cap and things like that, and that's really carried the performance of the whole market, rather than the market doing particularly well. But that's about all the macro side of things. And then I also had a fantastic conversation on Friday, I think it was Friday, with a property trader who's done a lot of deals. And we were talking about the current state of the market, and that's something definitely you guys can come in on with your experience. And we were saying, I think ultimately from the investor perspective, if you use leverage, unless you've got a magic wand, it's difficult to make stuff stack up. It's as simple as that. And the best tool in the toolbox I see at the moment is deferred consideration. And we were talking about a relatively notorious property trader style wheeler dealer character from Milton Keynes, who may or may not be bankrupt at this stage, and may or may not be operating things via shadow directors, but I couldn't possibly comment on any of that, of course. And I actually heard, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but his portfolio is doing the rounds for sale, where the rents are, appallingly low. It's just impossible to pull off, especially in the hands of the people that it's now under the control of, because you need to buy it so cheap.
Plus, it will be probably illegal and like all kind of mess.
All corners cut. Property.
Yeah, it's 40 pence
the property that he was involved in.
Yeah, it's 40 pence in the pound territory to make it worthwhile for the amount of risk that you've got to take. And I think it's one of those where I've done this in the past, where you buy it and you immediately phone all the EHO and all the people who might be involved in the problems that there might be, and fall on the sword and say, listen, these are the problems that there are. I know they're there. I'll sort them out as soon as possible. Right? Do what you want about it. If it means prohibition orders, that might actually help me. So be it. If it means this, if it means that. Now it's and that sort of strategy is extremely risky, of course, and you need significant resources behind you to act. If certain, in the ideal world, you control it via an exchange with delayed completion, sort the problems out before you were the legal owner, and that would keep you out of the courts that you might be in. But these sort of options aren't necessarily there, and these situations at the moment where it's like, well, the rents could be improved, and they say that, and they're like 40% below the market rent. It's like, could be improved, but the problem is no one's going to go anywhere near lending on them, and we can't go from 40% below to market rent in one fell swoop, because we're going to lose half the tenants and the other half won't pay, and they'll be in, and we'll need to evict them. So we're going to lose 100% of the rent roll if we do that, pretty much. So at a one property level, you can do that because you can assess the tenant, you can talk with the tenant, you can understand it. At 100 property level, there's no chance. And you're much more at risk of being the big bad corporation that people don't feel they need or have any obligation to pay the rent to. Whereas at the one property, one-to-one, person-to-person level, it's a much easier thing to do. So some of these deals are a bit stuck, really, in terms of, and of course, I've got this stat in my head that is really, really mithering me at the moment, of this thing that I read, and I didn't see the source of it was a credible publication that I read it in, but I didn't see the source data, and I haven't been able to find it. 2 million of 5.5 million rentals in the UK have got encumbrance on them, and the other 3.5 million haven't. Now that just seems an incredibly low. Now, look, I day by day talk to people who use leverage. That's my circle of people as a general rule. And we were talking about it at the Pip's 6th birthday thing on Friday. And we did theorise, from, this is the other stat that was bothering me, was 50% of rentals are owned by landlords who've got mortgages on them that started before 2008, which again sounds very, very high to me. But of course, there are these huge pockets of people who bought 100, 150, 200, 250, 300. If you go up into the northeast, there's people who bought thousands using the no money down strategies and bought whole streets and all the rest of it. So perhaps that is accurate. But all of those that are still on that's 50% of the rental market are all paying at least base plus 1.7, if not base plus 2 is the general pricing. And as base continues to progress, even if your yield is mega, you're talking to people at the moment who are putting a brave face on it, but they're trying to pretend a portfolio with a gross yield of 9% is not losing money. And it's like, hold on, you've got agency and running costs, and your interest rate today is 7.25, and in the third week of this month it's 7.5. You're 100% losing money, and you own it in your personal name. So because of the personal name thing, if you're not losing money today, wait till the 31st of January 2025 when this year's tax bill goes in, and you're in real shtuck, you know.
So that's saying 50% of like buy-to-lets have had their mortgages for 15 years and haven't done anything about it. Come on.
Well, this is it, or 50% of mortgaged ones. That means Helen. So if that 2 million was correct, 1 million of them are on pre-08 mortgages. And
but those things, like at some point, those were advantageous things. You didn't want to do anything about some of those mortgages because they were at such a good level. Sometimes even
there was no reason to do much till 2021, 2022. There really wasn't, because the base, as soon as base hit 0.5 and it never looked like it was going back up, you know, you were at 2.5% and you were cash flowing. But the trouble is they've all spent that money, right? They haven't reinvested it. So then that leads you to, well, how are these unencumbered ones developed? But what we were theorising was there were a lot of landlords that came from the generation above, that came from the no debt is good debt generation. And also in those days, the credit dried up at 65, 70, 75. So if you were older and you knew you were going to get to your end of your mortgage term, you had to pay them off. Yeah. And then you haven't bothered to re-gear them because you've just sat on a very nice, big, fat, unencumbered portfolio that's going up in the background in capital growth terms. And you might not have maximised what you've done, but you don't mind too much because you've been making money. And of course, those are the people who are also, if that's true, they're not in any trouble because the interest rate doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter, not beholden to anybody. In fact, they're laughing because the rents are rocketing up through the roof if they want to push that button. Not that they have to cover costs, although, as I've been making the point over the last few months, they do still have to cover the costs of, if people want £1,000 to hang a door, you still got to cover those costs when it used to be, 75 quid and you used to grouse about it, now it's £1,000. But except it's not.
I mean, it swings and roundabouts, right? Because before the removal of Section 24, people that hold those assets in their company name or in their own name will be able to get mortgage rate relief, right? So whatever they were making, they could offset against their mortgage costs. So those people that don't have mortgage costs weren't able to offset and probably had a higher tax burden. And now you've got those people that obviously survived that now have, everything's in their personal name and the issues that come with that. So it swings and roundabouts because, with no mortgage, before clause 24 left, you could get your profit offset on your cost, at least the cost of your mortgage. That obviously is a nil effect now, but for the last years -6 it was.
This is what fascinates me about this subject is I do want to go on to the cup, by the way, so don't let me forget the cup because the cup needs mentioning, but not this cup. This is not just an aid memoir, it's just a glass of water, but
is that a pint of water? Because it doesn't count if it's not.
It's more like about, I think it's about 500. It's one of these European jobs, mate, I think, really. So it's more of a half litre. But
shown that I read the supplement.
I see what you did there. Very well done. Very well done. One of my favoured subjects, although it's never been relevant to me on a personal level, I read up an awful lot about it because I thought I might be doing deals which involved using part of this is the Section 162 incorporation relief that people have been going through. And there are the really, really, really good tax advisors who are not going out doing this specific sales pitch, as a few of them have been over the years, one or more of which might already be in trouble with or are going to be in trouble with HMRC for some of the general anti-avoidance rules that they may or may not have breached with the solutions that they've put together for people. I mean a tax firm that understands investment, property, business accounts, the whole lot, and have got really, really, really good tax advisors. They were incorporating portfolios for people leveraged and unleveraged until well before George Osborne did his magic in 2015. There's elements in there such as that are not in dispute, such as when you incorporate, you rebase at today's value. So if you bought all these properties in 1990 to 1995 in your personal name, by 2010, even with an adjusted price or 2005 or whatever, it made a huge amount of sense to spin them into a company because you had a huge capital gains tax bill that was pending for somebody at some point. It's much easier from a succession planning perspective to pass these down or pass some shares down to children or have different dividend structures, family investment companies, all the rest of that. That's not available to you in your personal name. You start having to consider trust and the costs and all the rest of it that will involve, which is nowhere near as flexible apart from anything else. So the point of the limited company has always been there, and it's much easier for the unencumbered because they haven't got to get permission from their lenders. Not that all of the schemes on the market actually advocate you being 100% honest with your lenders, which I find abjectly ridiculous, of course. And how they've done what they've done in volume, I have no idea how they've done that in good faith. But there you go. This is why I'm the worst. People ask me about this stuff all the time, and I'm the worst person to ask because like, which scheme should I use? I'm like, bad news. The answer's none. The answer's none of them. The answer's a proper accountant and a proper lawyer and make sure it gets done properly. But you're probably going to have to refinance. And there are some other bits in some of them that I'm not keen on at all. But I'm very, very conservative when it comes to where you want to push HMRC. And not everyone is of the same ilk. So that's up to them. In the new old days after 2015, when the clause 24 of the Finance Act was first amended by Parliament after George Osborne's budget, it wasn't so bad because you still had the HMRC clearance, pre-clearance. And yes, even clearance is not carte blanche to do whatever you want, but it's a very, very different proposition when you've got clearance to when you haven't got clearance. Let's face it. It's a big help if you ever had to go to court in the future, because some of these we're talking about millions of pounds. And the problem with these schemes, a bit like some of the stamp duty evasion that's going on at the moment, you know, this goes on for 6, 7, 8 years, and then a bill comes and it's a wipeout. It's a business ender. It's a personal asset ender. It's a bankruptcy situation if people get found out. And of course, nowhere near everyone does get found out, so there is an incentive to cheat, but you don't want to be in that pool. You know, you don't need to be in that pool. If your business can't work without being fraudulent, you might as well do it properly and be a drug dealer or something, and go and be a proper criminal instead of being a white collar one. You know, there's no difference really in the two, I don't think. So going back to the cup. So the property trader conversation revolved around. She saw it as very much like a 2012 kind of market at the moment. So there's been a repricing and a readjustment. And I found that really interesting because it's similar to an argument that I've made already this year that, guys, the adjustment has come. I'm not saying it's over, but if you take today's figures, we're 5.3% down from the peak, according to Nationwide. In the interim period, we've had wage rises of over 8%. And we've had inflation that over that period has averaged about 8%, right? So down 5, up 8 in terms of earning and all the rest of it. Not mathematically totally correct, but add those two together, that's 13% of a correction in real terms. Now, in real terms, the market only corrected about 17% in 2008. So did we need a blow off top that was 2008 size when we still had credit? I mean, the price of credit's gone up a lot, but it's not like it's been withdrawn. And a lot of people have been sitting on capital growth have still had the option to refinance. They don't like the rates that they're refinancing at, but they can refinance to keep the wheels on the road. And they're refinancing at 40 or 50% LTV, which means there is still a bit of cash flow to eke out of it, even if the interest rate is particularly penurious. And these large fees are also taking money from the future in terms of capital growth. But, you know, you're less worried about that when you're talking about 5, 7 and 10 years in the future than you are when you're talking 2 years in the future. And I thought, she's thinking pricing is going to get squeezed further in the latter half of this year, early part of next year. But when we got into the weeds a little bit, we're specifically really talking about the stock that exists between, say, 175k to put a number on it, all the way up to say £500,000. The second stepper sort of stuff around a lot of the country. Appreciate that the top end of that range is entry level in central London, but we're not just talking about central London. And that side of it is squeezed because the first-time buyers who traditionally would try and move up the chain are squeezed by the fact their mortgage payments are doubling or going up by an average of 200, 250 quid a month or whatever it is. They might have passed the stress test for that when they got assessed for the mortgage, that they would have done because that was the rules at the time. But nonetheless, passing a stress test and what you get used to in your lifestyle is two different things. And if your mortgage goes from, if your cost of living crisis has been completely absorbed by the fact that you were assessed at being able to afford £1,000 a month, but you've only paid 500, and that other 500 quid has been there to absorb the electricity bill and the shopping and the whatever. If that 1,000 then becomes 1,000, or it in fact becomes 1,200, obviously it's a bit of a culture shock apart from anything else. So you choke the second steppers, and then that means that sort of mid-market in a lot of the country is slowing down to a near halt, and that's where there are deals to be done. But the problem from our perspectives is some of those deals are being done, and they look a bit fake because they're on at a 2022 price, and then it's 300 grand, let's say, and 300 was the top in the road. No one's ever paid more than 300, but it's on at 320, and someone secures it at 285, and it looks like the deal of the century to them. But in real terms, if the market's down 5.3% and that part of the market's hit specifically quite difficult, they're paying market price, or they're paying more than market price to do that theoretical deal. This is being supported at the moment by the fact that RICS are still valuing capital values fairly generously because they're still working on the old data like they do, but they're being very harsh on rental values when people are showing them tenancies, even though they know what's going on in real time. When it comes down to the RICS approach of where's the comparables over the last X months, rent comparables from 6 months ago from a tenancy that's been running for 3 years are not comparable to a new tenancy today. They're night and day different. So that is suppressing the prices. And then we went on to the life philosophy part, the cup and all the rest of it. And her analogy is, which I've heard similar before, about a bucket, but everybody's got their cup, and the cup's full of water, but there are things that take water, that spill water out of the cup. So depending on who you are and where you are and what you're juggling, it might be partners, it might be kids, it might be divorces, it might be business failures, it might be business partners, it might be new businesses, it might be all of these things. You might have a full-time job and be trying to do this as a side hustle. You might have a full-time job and a side hustle and try and do this as a second side hustle, But the point is not equivalent to the Love Island girls, we've all got 24 hours a day, so sort of get on with it sort of thing. It's more, be cognizant of what you've got in there and manage what you've got in there. And don't be unrealistic about what you think you'll be able to do. And if something else has got to take water out of the cup, what else is going to give? Because your capacity is pretty fixed, right? Things like 5 a.m. club try and persuade you that your capacity is not fixed. But at some point, if you are, used to having 8 hours of sleep a night, you cut yourself down to 4, after 3 months, your body will give up on you and you'll struggle even if you make it to 3 months. So the point is, preserve the cup at all costs, because you're in charge of your cup and nobody else really spends their time worrying about whether your cup overfloweth or is, empty of water. And it was I think maybe because I've been away and I've been reflecting on an awful lot of things, it was an analogy that really struck home with me, and that's why I thought I'd share it with everybody. And I thought it was a really good one. And I said to her, I'm going to put this in the supplement. She didn't want to be credited by name, but I said, I'm going to put this in the supplement. You'll see this week's image will be one of a pint of water, but the best image I could find was more of a tumbler really than a pint. Before Jane makes that point again. So,
I started listening to Stephen Bartlett's book, The 33 Laws for Business and Life, and what he talks about is 5 buckets. Well, like 5 buckets, and we have to fill those buckets and keep them filled, because once you fill one, then it like spills to the second one, and blah blah. Similar analogy.
I liked it. I like the fewer buckets, the better. It's more simple that way, isn't it? So if you just got I know what you mean. I like Stephen Bartlett a lot, although I find him one of the most annoyingly arrogant seeming people on the planet. The way he asks the questions and the guests that he gets on the podcast are just great. He's got some absolutely great material. Although I do find his clickbaity stuff a bit annoying, I must say, when it's like, some of the stuff that come up on my YouTube, nobody's business, I'll tell you. And I just think, hope the kids haven't logged in and seen that tagline for that video, because that looks like God knows what they think I've been watching on YouTube,
Yeah, it works well when he leaves those, like he stops somebody halfway through a sentence and you're like, oh, finish the sentence. And you have to, it's very cleverly, annoyingly, but cleverly done.
Well, he's grown an audience in an incredibly short space of time, and the people that he's outgrown already, it's very, very. He'll be the Mr. Beast of business podcasts. It'll be a question of how big can it really get, because how many people are really interested in, personal development and that sort of stuff. But he's batting with the biggest players in that space. So he's not going to be Joe Rogan, but he's batting with some of the biggest players in that space already. He'd need to expand his remit even further if he was going to really take it to it. But someone told me how true it is. I don't know where they got it from. You can pay to appear on the podcast if you want. It's a cool £250,000 if you want to make it on there, onto Diary of a CEO, but you can do it.
Well, apparently he's got huge Telegraph, which is the app. Telegraph?
Telegram, I think you're thinking of. Yeah.
He's got huge Telegram communities where obviously it's all funnel based, as everything is, right? But you've got like here's the basic pitch information. This is free. You get the interaction, blah blah blah. And the further down the funnel you get, the bigger the price point gets to be in his communities. So he seems to have managed that quite well.
Sounds like some of the property trainers on steroids, basically. Although with a real track record behind it. But I mean, you see why he does that. I think I must say I consumed quite a lot of American-based content because I think the algorithm picked up I was there, and I didn't do any reading. All the downtime stuff I was doing was listening to YouTube, and it's just funny to see the American way of just quite how brutal everything is to them. There was quite a bit of stuff around the Republican nominee debate, and then a fair bit around Trump being arrested and all this, that, and the other. But the business style advice and the how they do it and stuff, half of me really likes it, because it's like hardcore Peterson on real steroids. You just got to do it all yourself. It's all on you. They can't trust anyone. This is it. It's up to you. Get on with it, sort of thing. And then half of it makes me think, God, I'm bloody glad I don't live in America, because it's a savage old environment, And I think that's why the slightly more lily-livered but extremely intelligent go over to Silicon Valley and create this little bubble for themselves where they're protected from the more brutal business environment of somewhere like Florida.
If you want something to disrupt your algorithm on YouTube, I was given a tip from someone who is not a fan of Jordan Peterson, but she's a fan of Sam Harris. Apparently, Sam Harris is a bit like Jordan Peterson, but they disagree on quite a few different things. And she suggested it, and there's some discussions between them.
Let me give you a loose flavour, because I've been a big fan of Sam Harris as well for years. Sam's a neuroscientist who has been a devout atheist, and if there's criticism of him, primarily it's been around him being very anti-Islamic. He's also been extremely anti-Trump and was very, very, very negative about Peterson interviewing Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which is a more difficult position to take, because that is a bit of a tough one, because you've got the free speech lobby, which Peterson would very, very much put himself at the head of, although he's not a traditional Republican by any stretch of the imagination. And he's from Canada, so you wouldn't even categorize him as a Republican anyway, but you know what I mean. And Harris thought he was completely wrong to even give him a platform because Robert F. Kennedy's a nut job. Now, actually, the truth there lies somewhere in the middle. Sam's got a great podcast, and he does a lot about meditate. He's quite big on meditation. He's got an app called Waking Up, which is worth checking out, because he's got probably the best qualifications in the world behind a lot of this stuff. He really is very good. And he's got a podcast called Making Sense, which is very, very good as well. But when they first conceptualized what was known as the intellectual dark web, which was the first organisation I ever looked up in my life and thought, bloody hell, I'd love to be a member of that. That sounds very, very cool. Which has got Peterson, Sam Harris, Bill Maher. I don't know if you guys know Bill Maher, but he's worth checking out because he's a Democrat who gives the Democrats a hard time, and he's a comedian. Has a great podcast called Club Random, and he speaks the truth. The man is fantastic, and I think he can bat with those guys, even though he's a comedian. He's right up there. He has a really, really good sense of right and wrong. But as society sort of flows around him, it changes the position that people perceive him to be in. But he's very, very good. Barry Weiss, the former New York Times journalist, and the Weinstein brothers, not to be confused with Harvey. Sorry, they prefer Weinstein. Sorry, not Weinstein. Brett and Eric. Eric is a incredible level mathematician. I mean, real physicist, proper, genuine, bona fide genius. But he also plays the electric guitar, and he's a hell of a character. And his brother, and he's been on loads of podcasts, and chatted with Peterson and things like that. And his brother Brett does a podcast called the Dark Horse Podcast, and he was a university professor who basically got chased off a campus in the States for being white. So he has a very a vault-fast view of segregation coming back in limited ways in universities in the States. And he's an evolutionary biologist, and again, phenomenally intelligent. And they are, if you start going down that rabbit, that's what that apart from watching people play high stakes poker, is what my YouTube algorithm looks like, with a bit of Bartlett sprinkled in and a few of those other ones. So it's good advice because it pushes you. Interestingly, when I started watching a lot of that stuff, the route my algorithm also went down was starting showing me counterpoint opinions. And I thought that was very good because it wasn't, they must have somehow calculated that people who watch that sort of stuff like to hear across the spectrum. So it started showing me quite a lot of far left stuff, which I've watched with interest and vitriol in equal proportions, but hasn't really shown me any far right stuff. But perhaps that's because YouTube freedom of speech parameters don't go quite that far. I don't know. I did watch Joe Rogan interview Alex Jones, who's about as right as you'd want to go, and I did watch while I was away because I'd never given him any airtime before. I'm not going to lie, but let's call it academic interest. I did watch a very long interview with Andrew Tate that was done recently, and the guy called Patrick Bet-David. I don't know if you ever come across him, but he's got a business focused podcast over in the States, and he's he sold a big insurance company, got a fantastic mentality, fantastic mindset, go out and get it. Armenian, I think. Armenian, lived in Iran, moved to the States, started from.
I find him rather monotone. After 10 minutes, it gets heavy.
I think you've got to be. If you watch one of his monologue videos, I totally agree with you. But his interviewing style can be quite interesting, and he's had some interesting people because he's one of those who has. He's a very, very proud capitalist, but he's interviewed Slavoj Žižek, who probably the best conversation I've ever heard. The most difficult time anyone's ever given Peterson is when Peterson speaks to Slavoj Žižek. And it's worth a look because Zizek's a bit like Chomsky, but he's not as mad, but he's still a bit mad.
He's still a bit mad. And he's got the name that fits the way he speaks, right? Because you think only he can say his name properly. He's got kind of like a lisp, but he's got that disorder where his thoughts are quicker than his mouth.
Yeah.
So he trips quite a lot, and some people say that's like an autism ADHD kind of thing, but it's separate from that. The guy is an absolute genius.
That's just genius. But
he looks like a complete mess. He looks like Albert Einstein and Chomsky did something very naughty one evening in Vienna. That's the look he's got. So he probably won't appreciate that.
But yeah, I watched. It was Bet David interviewing Andrew Tate. It's long. It's about 4.5 hours long or something crazy like that. But it inspired me to. About 3 hours in, I googled what is Andrew Tate's IQ, because I hadn't given him credit for being as intelligent as he is. He's obviously very, very highly manipulative, right? But there's some real evil genius behind all of that. And of course, he throws in enough stuff that you thought that would have enough common ground with someone like Peterson for you to be like, if you're sympathetic to Peterson, there's an element to which you might be sympathetic to Tate, because he does tell you got to do it for yourself. He does tell you got to do this. He does tell you, he does have those traditional values that he's massive on free speech. He has all these things you'd agree with. And it made that whole thing just makes me wonder, because I'm sure you guys will have heard of Hustlers University or whatever it's called these days, but this massive educational program that Tate's got that brings in, double figure millions of dollars a month in revenue. And it's like, I think it's the biggest university in the world, although obviously it's not a proper university. But it makes me, there's a space between Bartlett and Andrew Tate for sure. But Bartlett is highly sophisticated and dealing with a more sophisticated and older and probably slightly different in their ambitions and their priorities sort of person. But there's probably not as much clear water between those two as you might like. And that's probably the most controversial thing I'll ever say on the internet, I'd imagine. But Bartlett and Andrew Tate are closer together than either of them would like to admit, probably, I'd imagine. It's all funnels. It's all funnels, that's for sure.
It's all funnels. I think the things that separate them probably outside of ideology, but probably including ideology, is how mainstream they attempt to appear. Bartlett makes himself exceptionally very mainstream. He doesn't really step too far out of line on any real subject, and if he does, it's within recognized parameters of, that's a little bit to the left, that's a little bit to the right, but if you take that little bit to the left and a little bit to the right, that brings it back to the center again. There's not a great deal that Andrew Tate says that puts him in the middle of anything.
That's very true. That's very insightful. Very true. Yeah. He's deliberately but one is trying to be deliberately uncontroversial, one is trying to be deliberately controversial. Both of those styles work for different audiences.
The manipulations are there. Here's the thing. Anyone with any degree of measurable intelligence over the 120s almost exclusively exist in a world of shifting sands, where everything is, because they view things from such a height and a distance, they see everything as movable. They see what moves things, and then it's called manipulation, but they're just predicting the movements it goes down. Or there'll be the little kind of devil in the ear or the angel on the other side, just kind of a little whisper, The Americans aren't great at subtleties, so I'm probably describing for myself here. But just a little whisper in the ear, and you can direct things in most ways, but it requires a deviancy in your IQ.
I see the delight in your face as you described that, Jay Howard. I see it clearly. The sparkle in your eye.
I'll be honest, I do like a little manipulation every once in a while. Try and take out as much of the negative undertones of that as you can.
Well, look, when you put forward an offer for a deal, right? When any of us, of course, we're couching it in the terms that we deem to be relevant, aren't we? So, he who is without sin cast the first stone, and all that, my friend. You know how it is. So I think I've only had the first 50 minutes, really. We've got a good 10 minutes left for everyone to really get stuck in. But thank you for allowing me to top up to my contractual obligations, folks. That is very much appreciated.
That was a good broad range of topics. Go for it, Jane.
I did have one question. You said one of the positives, this was very early in the call, one of the positives in terms of news that came out was that car manufacturing is up. Is there any breakdown on what the makeup of that is? How much of that car manufacturer is electric or hybrid?
There is, and it's a great question, and it's obviously a relevant question. And where do you? I know the answer, but you tell me where do you think it should be if we're going to get to net zero by 2030?
It should be at least 70% now, and that should be jumping by 10% a year. Right.
I was going to expect you to say somewhere between 70 and 80%. Do you know where it is?
36.
That's incredibly close. Incredibly. Did you Google that? I think it's 30.
No.
I think it was 39.
Wow.
And that's hybrid plus full electric. So there's not. I haven't seen the breakdown for full EV versus, but it's kind of like, and you're claiming that. And so let's just do a bit of maths here. The average lifespan of a car is, and I don't know how long the lease. Well, I guess the thing is, it's a very regional thing, isn't it? Because you drive around certain parts of the country, you don't see a car less than 10 years old. Before we were in the States and we were up in Yorkshire for a week, when there were certain bits we drove around, where we were was a very nice place with some stables and lovely part of the country. But when I went to Lidl one day in a small settlement about 8 miles away, I came out the car park. I went to the shop. I came out the shop, walk into my car, which I parked on the far side of the car park, which I tried to get in the habit of doing to get my step count up, right? And so that means you walk past it sounds good until you've got 6 bags of shopping you're struggling with to try and get back to the car. But anyway, so I walked past all the cars in the car park and I thought, blimey, there's not a car younger than 10 years old in this car park. And look, that's the demographic of the people who were shopping at Lidl in that particular area. But that wasn't a small number of cars. That was 50 cars or something, So I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it's more likely to be about 10 years, Jay. Certainly before scrappage, average, if not longer. I'd have thought more like 10 to 12 to even 15 years.
I'd guess 15.
So we're still putting the majority of new cars out on the road that are ICE or whatever you want to call them, the internal combustion engine, when we're going to meet these targets. Well, that just makes the scrappage scheme that there would need to be to do these sort of things. And I know it's only new car production by 2030, but some of the manufacturers have said it's going to be by 2025. I'm not sure if they've given up on that yet because I haven't followed that particularly closely. But in case you haven't noticed, it's nearly 2024. And the way production works, unless they're putting full electrics on the track from about March next year, it's not happening, is it? It's not happening. So we need a realistic conversation before we start the anti-pressure group, Just Start Oil or something like that. We need a realistic conversation about what can be done and how this transition is managed rather than everybody getting angry about it. And it's a great reminder going to the USA in terms of, we are such a bloody pebble in a pond. Throwing the orange dust around over the snooker tables or whatever, it's such a giggle. We are less than 0.1% of the world's population. We don't lead the world in anything anymore, apart from national statistics, which you seem to be still pretty good at, and perhaps the rule of law and the university system. I think we can probably still claim those just about. And the property market, which is a great thing to be able to the property, develop property rights and stuff like that. But it's not our job to police the world, just like it shouldn't be America's job to be the army of the world. Yes, it's good for us to make an example, but the reality is we're slipping down the league tables. It won't be long before India's a bigger economy than us. We'll be by the time we're properly in our senior years, the UK will be the 10th biggest economy in the world for a whole number of reasons, right? So, and when you look at what they do in the USA, before I even start, and when you go to countries like the UAE, in terms of how they use energy or do or don't conserve energy, it's just we're getting our knickers in a twist about something the rest of the world is not necessarily on board with, nor does their economy support doing it this way. And we do have to address energy security. And if we don't get some of these things right, people will die. People will die. Hey, it's Abby time. It's Abby time. We see you. We see you. Good stuff. But yeah, so how have you guys been finding, pipelines of opportunities? Are a lot of deals coming on your desk to be funded, Helen? Are any of them realistically able to be funded?
I've had lots of people sending me lots of things, but I've not been looking at much. So I've got the delights of that to look forward to this week. But no, exactly. It's the longer term stuff is still just feels like guesswork. to be honest. So I got to tell you, my appetite isn't huge right now. So
Yeah. I'm not.
Yeah, if anyone's going to send me anything, please make it exceptional.
I'm not super worried about GDVs necessarily going down too much, I must say. But I understand what you're saying. I did see your post at the beginning of August saying like you were having a downtime month or whatever, and I thought, I'm having myself one of those. So I'm looking for. I don't usually, because we usually work throughout August, but actually this year I'm glad it went that way, because the volume. I don't know what you tell me, Piotr, but I think the volume's been really, or the volume of interesting stuff through auction has been quite poor this month.
Yeah, it's been. I mean, there's a lot of properties offered, and that auction, that have 3 auctions. No, sorry, an auction every 3 weeks. Like Savills now put an auction every 3 weeks, and they've got like 250 properties in the catalog. It's insane, and it's like obviously all the other auctions have got more auctions a year than they used to have, and
because lower cost to put them on. Now there's more lots than there's been for years. Yeah.
Plus services like Viewber make everything super easy to run. It's a very well run operation nowadays. But what I found is that a lot of the properties that are offered for the second time. For example, they haven't sold in September auction. Now they're in October auction, and you will see a lot of that happening. And I think there's in general more properties offered. EIG released that data from July recently, and that shows that there's about 20% more properties offered. 30% more properties offered, but 20% less in terms of volume raised. So more properties being offered, less money is being raised. That basically means people are not buying as much as they used to do.
So I suppose if the inventory is growing and growing because a lot of these need to go, because either it's traders having a second look, we sold one in an auction that then got flipped into another auction, and I was annoyed that we might not have put it in the right auction, but I was pretty sure we got it right. I think we sold it at 38 and it ended up selling at 39, and I thought, well, good luck. I never thought it was going to get more than 40 grand, and sure enough, the 39,999 ceiling or whatever kicked in, but the auctioneer didn't even get them the 39,999. Unfortunately, just got them the 39 grand. But that went
come to how much?
That was third time up that they resold it. Should have come to Hammered. Yeah. But that was. It took Auction House London twice. By the time we waited another 2 months, we'd have definitely lost more than £1,000 on holding costs. So it was one of those things. But But we've seen a fair bit of that. But of course, if that inventory is piling up and up and up and up and up, and then the new stock's coming in, the amount being offered becomes disproportionately larger than it's been for years. Or the auction houses turn around a bit and say, actually, guys, it's time that we need to be listing stuff at properly keen prices to get interest. We're not just going to do what we've done over the last 3 years, which is build relationships by listing anything that moves, because we've been desperate to fill a catalogue. How did Savs do out of that? How are they doing out of that 250 sort of lot style catalogue, or is that the next one?
Well, it's like I would say about 80 properties out of the 250 property catalogue is being withdrawn, and then about 70 to 80% sells of the properties that are being offered. So it's the numbers look on the what do you like,
the face of it,
the face of it, they look good, but in general, if you're a seller, they don't look as amazing.
For 70% of 60% is only 42, isn't it? 42%, which is not.
Yes,
and then
that's what we keep presenting on our Facebook group when we have put like recent auction results. We put like what the number on what the number is of the actual stuff that was offered and what the actual stuff that was initially put in the catalog, because that's quite important to distinguish.
Absolutely.
The fall through rate as well is arguably a lot higher, right? Because pre-COVID and things like that, the number of sales that fell through at auction was sub 5%, which is minuscule compared to really
open market. Yeah.
But I would say that's probably doubled or trebled since then, because all of the auctioneers most of the auctioneers are either taking a £5,000 holding fee, a £10,000 holding fee. No real auctioneer in the current market is taking a 10% deposit.
Ooh.
Someone can turn around and go, right, well, I've changed my mind, take the £5,000, I'm just going to disappear. I mean, you have bits and pieces of that before, but it was a harder decision for people to make, because instead of having £5,000 or £10,000, you'd have 50 or 100 grand or whatever.
Well, this is it. As a professional buyer, we were having, in the early days of all of this, we would be like, oh, we're looking at 7 tonight, and they were like, right, well, you've got to send a deposit over for all 7. And it's like, hang on a second, this is insanity, you know. So you need to be able to put a hold on a card or do something a lot more workable than that. And what gets workable is, you know, all these £5,000 collected before the auction, really. But yeah, there's problems with that as well, because I don't know if the AML's been really and truly properly followed with all of that either. But I mean, that's another.
It's some auctioneers are better at it than others. Some auctioneers take it way too far. Do you know what I mean? So it's degrees of competency and degrees of skill. But I mean, it is someone more, if they thought they bought a lemon, is someone more prepared to run away from £5,000 than 25,000?
Of course.
£5,000. Oh, you know, if you bought something for $500,000, would you walk away from 50 grand easily? You're going to pause. You're going to really think about it. But £5,000, it's very easy for someone to turn around and go, yeah, take the £5,000. I'll change my name via deed poll and I'll buy something next auction. So you take that, the 44%, you knock 15 off it. There's 30% of properties, if you're being really aggressive, are actually selling and completing at auction. And that's probably ultra aggressive and not very representative throughout the country, but you're talking worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And the problem is it's difficult. I mean, even you imagine you've got the sellers who are struggling to buy at real value. You've got the auctioneers who month by month, I mean, auctioneers are exceptionally well skilled at pricing the market, right? And that's really what they do, because they move at such velocity with that level of volume. They have to be very quick on the pulse. It's why they kind of work in that discount to market value based off of what's sold rather than what it's marketed at, and, you know, checking. They've got access to land registry style sites that tell them actual pricing that's gone through. And even then, from month to month, you can't get the pricing exactly right. And then the other thing is that, as well as estate agents, auctioneers are terrible at pricing in risk. They can price in cost. Everyone can price in a bit of cost. Oh, that's a 40 grand refurb. Okay, it might be 38 or 42. It's one way or the other, right? But they all struggle with risk.
Brilliant. Well, 10:04 alarm clock.
Alarm clock. The Piotr wants to go to the beach alarm has gone off.
No. That's at 3 p.m.
Good stuff. Good to be back. Thank you for welcoming me with open arms, as always, folks.
Yeah, it was brilliant chat. Thanks everyone for making the comments. Sorry we didn't manage to put them back on the screen, but we'll do respond them throughout the day. And we're holding an event as well all about different types of auctions on Tuesday evening. I'll put a link in the comments. You can see it on our website. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Jay. Let's go to the beach.
Thanks, everybody.